the first time my mom was diagnosed with cancer, I was 10 years old. And so thinking back to life in grade 4, I can remember a lot of normal things. So I can remember having sleepovers with my best friends, I can remember watching Scooby-Doo, and I can remember playing with my toys. But I can also remember a lot of things that weren't so normal. Like when my mom lost her hair, she dropped to a size 00, and she became as pale as a ghost. But the funny thing about being little, or at least in my experience, is that you don't question things. And so when she told me that her cancer was gone and that she was cured, despite everything that was happening to her, I believed her. And I thought everything was better and that everything would be the same as always, as if cancer had never even happened. But when you turn 15 and your mom tells you that she's diagnosed with cancer again, you don't react quite the same. This time, cancer wasn't just a scary word, it became an extremely scary reality for me, because at this point, I now knew people whose loved ones had passed away from cancer. And while I wish I could stand here before you and tell you that that fear remained inside me her entire cancer continuum, it didn't, because her ability to stay so calm and so cool and so collected caused me to turn back to my oblivious and hopeful 10-year-old self. And to give you a little bit of an idea on how this happened, let me tell you something about my mom. My mom was the biggest people pleaser. And so all of her friends thought that they were her best friends. If someone ever did something nice for her, they were permanently on her Christmas card and Christmas cookie list. And so if a difficult situation were to arise, she would always make light of it to diminish people's worries. And so I guess you could say that she played the ultimate deception on my sisters and I, because none of us knew how sick she really was. And admittedly, I probably should have known the difference. But I like living life that way. I liked not thinking about losing my best friend. I liked not thinking about losing my mother. And I liked living a normal life. And that normality remained for a few months. She was able to celebrate her 54th birthday. And a week after that, she packed my lunch and she took me to school, and I went to a basketball game. And from what I can remember, the basketball game was relatively uneventful. And the one thing I can really remember was when I was driving home with one of my friend's mothers, we were talking about how one of my classmates had lost her mom to cancer when she was in grade 7. And I remember sitting in the car saying, she is so strong, I cannot imagine losing my mom, because to me, that was such an unrealistic reality. And so when we returned to my friend's house, I tried to call my mom for her to pick me up. However, I couldn't get a hold of her, and that was quite common because she was always busy doing something. And so I just got a ride home with one of my friends. But when I arrived home, I immediately knew something was wrong. I came to the house, and all of the windows were completely black, but the car was in the driveway, which meant that she had to be home. And so I left the car, and I frantically entered the house, and I called for my mom, and there was no answer. And so when I turned on the light, my worst nightmare had become a reality, and I found my mom passed away. And the last thing that I could say to her before the ambulance and the police showed up were that I will never stop fighting in your memory. And trying to follow through with this promise and find something to commemorate her was something that really weighed on me. And the one thing that I could remember in both of her cancer experiences were that she lost her hair. And so I thought, I am going to fundraise to buy wigs for every single cancer patient in Newfoundland. And so I took my idea, and I came up to the Canadian Cancer Society, and I said, I'm going to fundraise you a ton of wigs. And then the person who was working there said, oh, Maike, that's a great idea, but, and there's always a but, we already have enough wigs. And so at that point, I realized I should probably start by asking instead of telling. And so I asked them, well, then what is the biggest problem faced by Newfoundland cancer patients? And she told me that the one the only place to receive radiation treatment in Newfoundland was in St. John's. And so you can imagine some people have to travel 2 hours, 8 hours, or 11 hours in order to receive that treatment. And you can imagine also that that becomes quite costly quite quickly. And so a lot of people have to make the difficult decision of whether or not they can afford treatment. And so I left behind wigs, and I moved towards accessibility. And in partnership with the Canadian Cancer Society, I started Katrin's Karepackage in memory of my mom, Katrin. So the mandate for Katrin's Karepackage was quite clear. If cancer patients are fighting for their lives, why should they be fighting for their treatment? And we wanted to offset those travel costs. However, then came the second issue. Well, how are we going to do that? And so I tried to reflect back on how I had fundraised in the past, and the one thing I could think of was bake sales. Well, I'd probably have to do a few hundred or 1,000 bake sales in order to make this sustainable. So I thought, okay, scratch that idea, I can't do that. And the next thing I thought was, okay, well, how have other people brought awareness to an issue and fundraised a lot of money? They tortured themselves physically. Okay, so I have to do something physically extreme. I'm going to bike ride across Newfoundland. With a 1,100-kilometer bike ride will represent the struggle and the journey that cancer patients have to take across Newfoundland in order to receive their treatment. The last time that I had ridden a bike was like 10 years before that time. However, I thought that I was pretty good at it, so I thought, this isn't going to be that hard. And it turns out that it was a little harder than I expected, not only just because of the bike ride, but also because people had a lot of doubts in me. So let me take you along my journey of training. So this was in August of 2013. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do this bike ride in August of 2014. I'm going to do it in 10 days. Then from September to May, I spent about 2 hours a day at the gym at the Delplex, hogging and sweating all over the stationary bikes. And then when I was finished my clinical, because I'm in nursing, when I came home to Newfoundland in June, I realized that not only should I probably begin fundraising, but I should probably learn how to ride a road bike, because apparently road bikes aren't the same thing as mountain bikes. So my first day on the road bike went really well. I was able to clip in my shoes, I was biking along with my dad, I was becoming a little bit too confident with myself, and then the second day rolled around, and everything went downhill when I saw a bunny. So everyone that knows me knows I love bunnies. Ever since I was 5, I've wanted a bunny. And so here I am, overconfidently biking along, and I see this bunny hopping across the road. And so to me, obviously, I'm going to try and dodge that bunny. And then I dodged straight into a ditch, and I fell headfirst over my bike, and the bunny survived. Unfortunately, my dignity didn't. And as if, like what anyone else would do, I looked around to see if anyone saw me do it. And of course, as I turn around, I see a lovely, competent bike rider heading my way. And thankfully, because of that bunny, I just met one of the best cyclists in female cyclists in Newfoundland, Vicki Parsons, and she became my trainer, and she worked with me for the next 2 months to get me ready for this journey. So if I wasn't busy biking, I was at the Canadian Cancer Society with Tara Shanahan, putting together sponsorship proposals, going to different companies, and also putting off little fundraisers with my friends and my family. And before I knew it, August had rolled around. So here you can see my bike ride. So I started right at the tip, and I went all the way down to the end. And so biking 110 kilometers a day took about 5.5 hours if I was going at a comfortable pace. But every day, there was a different struggle. So at the top of Newfoundland, there was really strong winds. And so sometimes it felt like I wasn't even moving, and my dad would actually have to circle back around to see if I wasn't hit by a car because he thought I was going so slow. And then in the middle of the island, I was greeted with some nice tortuous hills that I had to try and climb, so my legs were killing. And then when I got to St. John's, I was welcomed by a lot of rain and fog. But with every negative experience, there's always a story. And so my first day biking, I met a woman who was driving along, and she stopped her car, and she came out with her son. And she said that I just got back from my last radiation treatment, and I've just been driving 11 hours. And she hugged me, and she said, You don't know how much this means to the people of St. Anthony. We need this so badly. And then I continued to bike along, and I went into a convenience store, and then a little girl, probably 5 years old, ran up to me, and she's like, I saw you on the news. And then she started hugging my leg, and I was like, oh. And then she said, I lost my mom to cancer, and you're doing this for the both of them. And so you can see everyone telling their story, all the people stopping their cars and honking their horns. It suddenly changed from just a single bike ride, and it turned into a province coming together. And so by the end of the day, we raised nearly $35,000, which equals over 400,000 kilometers worth of free transportation. And you can imagine, with hundreds already being aided, those funds diminished. And so this Christmas, I ran 7 consecutive marathons across Newfoundland, the 7 days leading up to Christmas, and we were able to bump those funds up to $55,000, over 700,000 kilometers, and hopefully hundreds more will be aided. But now you can tell I'm living in Nova Scotia. And so it wasn't until I was volunteering on an oncology unit that one of the cancer patients told me that the one thing that she could remember about her entire cancer experience wasn't the treatment, it wasn't losing her hair, it was trying to get to her treatment. That I realized that this wasn't just an issue in Newfoundland, but it was one in Nova Scotia as well. And thanks to over 350 Dalhousie students in the health professions who put off a show called For the Health of It, over $54,000 were raised, and we were able to expand into Nova Scotia, where we can now offset those travel costs for patients traveling into Halifax. Oh God, no. And so you can see, in over just a year and a half, over $110,000 have been raised. And something that was once just a simple idea has turned into a program that is going to help countless cancer patients. And so I challenge every single one of you to find something that you're passionate about, set goals, and do it. And there are going to be people who try to get in your path, and they're going to tell you that you can't do it. I was told I couldn't bike, I couldn't run, that this program was not sustainable, and that I was too young. And you need to push those negative people and negative thoughts politely aside, and you need to remember the reason for why you are so passionate about what you do. And for me, my reason was simple. It was my mom. Thank you.